In this video, we'll have a look at how to work with fragments in Android. Right, so I basically just created a new blank application called Fragments Video 2018. So you'll see it's the basic main activity with the XML file, and that's all I have. Now remember what we said is that in the main activity or in an activity, we can host fragments. So before we start with fragments, let's create a few fragments first. So normally we work with two fragments. We basically call one the list fragment, or the list view, the one with the list view, and then we've got one with the details. So we'll create those two fragments quickly. So where you need to go is to go into your app folder, into Java, and then into your package folder. So then inside of this package folder, this is where we want to create the fragments. So I'm going to right click on the package folder there, and I'm going to say new, and you're going to go down. Instead of saying activity, you'll see that there's fragment. So we're going to go to fragment and say blank fragment. So we want to start off with a totally blank fragment, and then we will complete the rest. So I'm going to call this fragment the list fragment. So I'm just going to say list frag, and that fragment list will be fine. So for now, I'm not going to let it include fragment factory methods or interface callbacks. We'll include that inside of the coding later on. And you can see that the way that we're creating this fragment is allowing us now to create fragments compatible back to API level 4. So we'll just say finish then after that. So it needs to create the XML file, fragment underscore list XML, and then you can see it start building at the bottom. And let's just wait for it to stop building before we create the next fragment. Right, so when it's done building, we can go then and create another one. So I'm going to right click again and say new fragment blank fragment. And I'm going to call this one detail frag. So that will be my detail fragment. And again, I'm going to uncheck those two and just go to finish. Right, so now at this stage, you can see that we've got both fragments and your application is built correctly. There should now be no errors at all. So you can see under the resources layout folder that you'll have two new XML files as well as two new Java files. So just like the main activity, every fragment has got a Java file, and then it's got an XML file that represents the layout. So let's just quickly go to the list one. Now remember, if you still have problems here with actually seeing what's going on the screen here, I can see hello blank fragment there. So I can just maybe refresh or force refresh this layout. That should normally take care of all the problems on the layout. But if you still have problems without seeing hello blank fragment there, remember to go into your styles XML and just add there the base dot there for the theme. And then that should take care of that problem. For me, it's not a problem at all, so I'm just going to leave the styles XML as it is. Okay, so there's the layout. So this is the layout then for the list fragment. So in the list fragment, what I'm going to do here is to go into the text tab at the bottom and just change that to a linear layout again. I'm going to set the orientation to be vertical, and I'm going to remove that text view. So now also as part of this, I'm going to set a background property there, and I'm going to work with the color accent there. So if I go back to design, you can see it's all pink. Right. So now let's go to the detail fragment, and for that detail fragment, we'll do the same thing. We'll just have the linear layout, and I'm going to set the orientation also to be vertical. I'm going to remove that text view, and I'm going to just set a background color there. And let's just go with the primary dark there for that one. So we've got two fragments. This is the detail one, the dark one. And then for this one, it's the pink one. So now when we start working on the main activity with the two fragments, we can clearly see the two different colors of the fragments. Okay, so we'll get to coding a little bit later on in this video. But for now, let's go to the main activities XML file. So the main activities XML file, I'm going to change the constraint layout there to a linear layout, and I'm going to set the orientation to be horizontal, and I'll explain that now. So now on the text view, we're going to remove the text view there, and we're going to leave the background as it is. So if I go to design now, I can move my phone now to landscape mode, because in landscape mode is normally where we'll have two different fragments next to each other. And because they're going to be next to each other, it makes sense that my linear layout should be horizontal, going from left to right instead of going from top to bottom with the vertical. Okay, so in the next video, we'll see how we can do the portrait layout as well, so it will work 100% in portrait layout. So now, for now, we're going to leave it as landscape and see how the app performs on landscape mode. So if we just zoom in a bit more, what we want to do now is to drag into fragments. So you can see there's a fragment there. I'm going to drag the fragment to the horizontal linear layout, and you can see now my list of fragments pops up. So make sure that you first get your fragments created before you start dragging them to your linear layouts. So you can see the first one I want there is going to be my list fragment. Normally on the left hand side will be my list fragment, and then I'm going to drag in another one just underneath that one, which will be my detail fragment. So you can see it's named fragment and fragment 2 at this stage. So if you go to fragment, the first one, let's call that one list frag as an ID, and this one, let's call that one detail frag. Right, so we've got list frag and detail frag. But now you can see it doesn't look very nice. So if you click on your fragment, you're going to say, instead of wrap content in the height, you're going to say match the parent. Also for the detail fragment, if you go to the height property there, you're going to say match the parent. And again, it's just showing us 2 fragments, and it's this gray picture. So it's not actually showing me the view for that fragment, and that's the error that it gives us here. So if you click on that error and you open up, you can see there's 2 unknown fragment. It doesn't know which view to place or which XML file to place for which fragment. So now the first one here, you'll see that this one is the list frag, and I want to use this layout. So it actually picks up the correct layout there. It's just not showing it. So I'm going to click there, use that one, and then go into this again and say use that one again. So now you know, or you can see that the fragments that they are showing there are now the 2 correct fragments that I want. Now if you click on them also, you can see there's a property that's called layout, and the layout is pointing to your specific layout file for that fragment. So it's called list fragment, it is the list fragment, and it's the layout file called fragment_list. Right, so now we've got the 2 fragments there, but normally what we have is we've got a smaller part there for the list fragment and a bigger part for the detail fragment. So we can easily correct that by going into the text part there. So now you can see we've got 2 fragments and they are listed horizontally. So you can see that there's a weight property that's automatically there for every component that you bring to the screen. So now what I want to do here is to set the width property to 0 dp and set this one's width property also to 0 dp. And you can see that basically nothing changed. So why did it not change if I set the width of both components to 0? So as soon as you set the width or the height of a component to 0, the weight property comes into play. So what does the weight property tell us now? The weight property now is 1 for this fragment and 1 for this fragment. So if I look at my horizontal linear layout in the width now, and that's why I changed the width to 0, because my layout will be spanned horizontally. So that's the width. Okay, so I'm going to set the width for this one to 0 and for this one to 0, but both of them has got a weight of 1, which means horizontally there's 2 pieces or two parts, and the first one takes up one of the 2 parts and the second one also one of the 2 parts, and that's why you can see they are exactly the same size. So if we go down now and we set this one to 1 and that one to 2, it means there's now 3 parts on the screen where this one still takes up only 1 and this one takes up 2 of the places. So you can play around with your 2 fragments to get them the size that you want. If you know that your list view is going to be a bit wider, then you can play around with those values. You can even go to making this one 5 and that one 10 if you wanted to, instead of 1 2. So you can really play around with the values there. So I'm going to leave it at 1 2 there, which means this one takes up one of the 3 spaces, and this one takes up 2 of the 3 spaces. So now our fragments are laid out 100%. If you run this now, you will see it also gets displayed on your device. So there you can see that the activity has started and it's showing the 2 fragments nicely. But remember, when your phone is in portrait mode, we actually don't want to show it like this, but we'll fix that in the next video. But if I put my phone now to portrait view, you can see that now it works 100%. So I'll have my list view this side and I'll have my detail view here. I've got more screen real estate now, so it now makes sense to have two different fragments on the screen, and the fragments are showing 100%. So it's still one activity but two fragments displayed on the activity. Right, so let's add some data to these two fragments quickly. So on the first fragment there, which is the fragment list, I'm going to remove the background there. So I'm going to remove the background property totally, and we're going to leave it as white. But I want to add a list view there. So I'm going to go to Legacy, and I'm going to drag in a list view. Right, so there's the list view. And this list view now I'm going to use to add some items to a list. So this is the very first time also we're covering lists. So we'll do lists in more detail in a next video, where we can customize our list and the items that we want to place in the list and so forth. For this example, we'll use a very basic list. So let's just give the ID there for the list. I'm going to call it LV list, so LV for list view, and I'm going to call it list, LV list. Right, so now in this fragment list activity of mine, so let's go to list frag. So instead of saying extends fragment, we've got a class that is a list fragment. And you can see it's part of the support library, support version 4. So I'm going to use list fragment there. Now, because lists are used so often with fragments, they've got this class list fragment that helps us with a few methods to actually set items to a list. Now, because we're going to use the list fragment, I'm going to delete this method, but we're going to add some more methods here. So I'm going to right click there and we're going to say generate, and you're going to go to override methods. And the first method that we're going to search for is the onAttach method. So you can just start onAttach, and you can see there it is, not an onAttach fragment, just onAttach. So the onAttach method, we'll look at that method quickly, and remember this method is called when the fragment has been associated with the activity. And you can see there's the activity that was passed in. It's the context, but it's a link to our activity that is attaching the fragment. Now another method that we'll also need here, maybe we'll do that beneath this one. So we're going to have right click there, generate, override methods, and you're going to search for the onActivity created. So there's an onActivity created method, and remember that this method runs or is called when the activity's onCreate method is basically finished. It's returned back. So this method will help us then to set all of the other stuff after we've made a connection to the activity. Now, as part of a list view, because of this list fragment, we also have a very nice method that we can use, and we're going to go to override methods again, and you can see there's an onListItem click. So if a value in the list gets clicked, we will know exactly at which position in the list it was clicked. Okay, so now for this method, I'm going to remove the call to super, and we'll come back later to this method. Now the first one we're going to work with is the onActivity created method. So in this method, I'm just going to quickly set up an array list with data so that we can place that data in the list view. So it will be of type string, so it will only be string objects, and let's call it data equals new array list. So it's actually not necessary to add the string value there or the type there. You can just leave it open also. Right, so this is now the array list, and to the array list I'm going to set some data. I'm just going to say .add, and let's add items and number them. So I'm going to say 1, this is item 1. And then let's go to data.add, and we'll add the second data item there and say this is item 2. And let's go to data.add 3. This is item 3. And now in order to put this data now in our list view that we had for this fragment, we can just go and say set the list adapter. And for this list adapter, we're going to create a new array adapter. So if this doesn't make sense to you right now, don't worry, we will go and create our own custom adapter and everything will fall in place after this. In the next video, we will create our own list view and how we can place items in the list view. For now, this is just default values that we use to set items in a list. So the array adapter will be of type string because we're passing in string data items. So it's going to be new array adapter of type string. And then what we accept there, the first argument is the context. So in this case, we will just call getActivity. And getActivity will get us the activity that attached this fragment. The second argument will be a layout file. And because we're not going to create our own custom layout, we will go to Android's R file. So it's not our own project's r.java file. In our layout file, we only have these three, but I'm referring now to android.r.layout. So it's predefined layouts, and we're going to go with simple list item 1. So that's just a normal text view that will show us some text in the list view. Right. And then your last argument there that you're going to pass in will be the data that you want to display in the list. And unfortunately, when using this array adapter, you can only use one string item that you pass in for every item that you want to set. So in the next video, we will see how we can add more data and pictures and everything that we want as an item in the list view. Right, so very basic for now. Right, so let's run this quickly and see if this works. So if I run this now, I'm going to run it on the phone. Let's see if this works. Right, so there the application is running, and you can see the items in the list nicely displayed. And that's exactly the items that I had there. So remember that this array list could now come from a database or can come from anywhere. This is now just hard-coded and then displaying the items. But I mean, you can get this data from a database, which we'll see later on. Right, so there's the three items that we wanted to display. And then now if we click on one of these items, we want to also display something on the detail view. So with this, we can then have a parallel array on an array list that will work together with this array list to show different items. For example, we could have the chess pieces listed here, the names of the chess pieces listed here, and in another array list, we could have in the very same positions correspond to these positions to have the descriptions of those chess pieces, just as an example. But we're not going to get into, or not going to do a too complicated example for today. So we will do the other array list in the main activity. So in this case, you can see that clearly the data is showing nicely, but now we want to start showing some information on the detail view. So now in order to do that, I'm going to go to the detail fragment. So remember the detail fragment, if we put it on landscape mode, it's still the blue background. So we can leave it as blue if we want to. It's the linear layout that's vertical, and I'm going to drag in one text view to display. So because it's currently black, I'm going to set the text color there to a #12345 so that we can clearly see it on the blue. And then maybe we can set the margin on the left to 20, on the right to 20, and move it a bit from the top, let's say top 20 as well. So that's the text view. Let's make the size for that text view an 18 maybe, just to have it a bit bigger. Now on that text view, let's call it TV description, so that we know that's the description of what we clicked in the detail view, or in the list view, to show the description in the detail view. So it's called TV description. Now the nice thing about this is because the main activity is hosting the fragment called detail fragment, we can directly have access to the components that's listed on the screen. So for an example, we have direct access to this TV description. So in the main activity, remember on the main XML, we actually don't have that text view, but because the main activity is hosting this fragment, that text view belongs also to the main activity. So in the main activity, we can actually refer to that text view. So I'm going to say text view, and we call it TV description. And then if I go down, let's go and set it up quickly. TV description equals find the view by its ID, r.id.tv description. So we've got a link now to that TV description. So now on the list view, if an item gets clicked, we want to go to the detail fragment and set corresponding text to that one. So now in the main activity, let's just create an array list here as well. So I'm going to say array list of type string also. Let's call it data also equals new array list of type string, or let's call it descriptions here. There we go, descriptions. Now to the descriptions, I want to add now the same basically as what I did here with the list fragment. So remember we said, well, this is item 1, this is item 2, this is item 3. So we can just say something like description for item 1, and then do the same for 3 times for description 1, for item 2, and for item 3, just to get an idea how this works. So now it could have been chess pieces where we said in the list fragment, this is the pawn and this is the king or the queen or the whatever. So we've got all the chess pieces listed here, and then on the main activity we have the description for every one of those chess pieces. But we can see that in position 0 is the description for item 1, and in position 0 that side is the item for item 1, or the chess piece for item 1, or whatever you have. So they must correlate. It's basically parallel arrays or parallel array lists that we're working with. So now in the list fragment, we click on an item in this array list or in the list view, and then we want to go and tell the main activity that a specific item was clicked, so that we can show this description or the specific description on the detail fragment. So in order for us to communicate between the two fragments, because it's now the list fragment where we click an item, and we want to show the description on the detail fragment, which means that we need to communicate between the list fragment and the detail fragment. There needs to be communication. So in order for us to communicate, we want to go to the list fragment, and we're going to create an interface. So I'm going to have that interface right at the top. It's going to be a public interface. Let's call it item selected. So that's the name of the interface. And now we need a method for this interface that will actually be the one method that sends through the data. So I'm going to say void, because I'm not going to return anything. And I'm going to call the method on item selected. And what the data that I want to pass through is just the index on where I selected that item in the list. Because the same index that I have in this list, let's say it's this one that was selected, which is at index number 01. It's at index number 1. So we want to go then and also show index number 1 there. So that's the only data I want to pass through. It's just the index value. So on this side, we're going to pass through the index, and we're going to get it on the other side on the main activity. And then the main activity will communicate back to the detail fragment what to display. Right, so the first step there is to create your interface. And then after your interface has been created, we need to create a variable in the list fragment, which was of type interface. So I'm going to say item selected, and I'm going to call it activity, because we want to connect now to the main activity that will communicate back to the detail fragment. So it's essentially going to be my activity that I'm going to make a link to. So item selected, activity. Then in the onAttach method, you will remember that we said this context here is the activity that attached this specific fragment. So here we're going to say activity. Remember, activity is now declared as our interface. And we're going to say equals, and you're going to declare it or cast it to the specific interface and just refer to context. So context in this case will refer to the main activity. And now I'm casting the main activity to an interface called item selected. Now you will get an exception here if you try to run this, because in this case our context, which is the main activity, is not yet an item selected. It hasn't yet implemented the interface. So that's the next step that we want to do, is to go to the main activity and implement this specific interface. So let's go to the main activity, and the main activity will say implements that interface item selected, and you can see it's part of the list frag there. So I'm going to say list frag dot item selected. Use Alt Enter there and say implement methods, and you can see there's the on item selected method. So this is the method now in the list frag that I said we should have on item selected. So on the main activity, there's a method now called onItemSelected, and it will get the index. So we'll get back to this. So now this activity will refer to the main activity that implemented our interface. So now when an item in the list gets clicked, we want to send through the data to the main activity. So that's as easy as referring to the main activity now, which is now activity, which implements that interface. And on that activity, we're going to call the method of the interface called onItemSelected. And what are we going to pass through? Just the index. In this case, it's called position. So I'm just passing through the position on where it was clicked. Now what will happen now? Remember that activity is a connection to the main activity. So in main activity, there must be a method called onItemSelected. So if we go to main activity, there's the method and there's the position that we pass through. So now the only thing I want to do here is to go to TV description, and I'm going to say set the text on TV description. Taking this array list, which is descriptions, I'm going to say descriptions there. Okay, so we'll have a problem there with descriptions. Let's just declare it there at the top. I'm going to copy it there. Let's declare it there and remove the declaration. Right, so we've got descriptions there at the top, and then I'm going to refer to descriptions here. And we're going to say .get, and now I want to get the object, or the text then in this case, at that specific index position. So I'm going to say index there. So descriptions.getIndex will return then the specific one that was clicked, and it's going to set it to the description. So let's run this quickly and see if this is actually working. Right, so now when the application is running, you can see that we can see the list view again. And if I click on an item in the list view, can you see its corresponding item is showing? This is item 1, and it's showing description for item 1. This is item 2, description for item 2. This is item 3, description for item 3. So you can see when I click, it communicates back to the main activity, and the main activity communicates back to this fragment by using TV description there. So what happens when we click? If I click there, go to list fragment again, just open up that one. If I click there on an item, what happens in list fragment, it goes to on list item click, and we refer back to the activity, which is the main activity, on item selected, and we pass through the position. So when I click, it passes through the position to the main activity on this method. And then we say TV description, which is on the detail fragment. We set the text to this array, the corresponding value there for the array list. So if I click there, it shows that item. Right, so we had a small problem there. If you just run this quickly again, and you'll see that when this application starts, we start off with text view there instead of the data for, let's say, the first item. So let's say we want to display the first item's data there also. So I'm going to go to the list frag, and then just after we set the data to the list, we can refer to activity again, and we're going to call that same method and just passing in a 0, which will click the very first item basically. So I'm going to run this quickly again, and we can see what happened there. Right, so there the app should now be running. Let's see if it shows that text view now correctly. And you can see now directly when it starts, description for item 1. And I can click and everything is working 100% now. Right, so this is the basics of how fragments communicate and how we can use fragments on one activity. And if I place my phone now to portrait view, you can see that this doesn't look good at all. So you can see this is item 1. It's very cramped up there. There's not enough space in the width of the screen to actually do this. So in the next video, we'll quickly have a look at how can we do these orientation changes also when you're working on a tablet, how we can use this to our advantage to show the list view and the detail view, or only show the list view first and then the detail view second.